Today's reading is from the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verses 5 through 7, 10 through 14, and 21 through 29. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed toward the people, and they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 elite chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone that we can serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord, in the pillar of fire and cloud, looked down on the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into a panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out thy hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and their chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. God is still speaking. Amen.
Before we begin, I just want to thank you for your prayers last week. And I was out with that dreaded virus, COVID. Just so you know, I never really got horribly ill. I had about 13 hours the whole time where I felt like I had a bad cold. And the rest of the time I was just tired. And the brain fog is real. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. But I'm fine now. I still have a bit of a sniffle. I attended a good friend's wedding at Harkless Park in Waterford Saturday or Friday. And the gardens there are beautiful and filled with things that I'm clearly allergic to. But I didn't leave the gardens because they were beautiful. Pray with me. Fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Let it overflow with love. Fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Let it overflow with love. Speak, Lord, for we, your people, are listening. Amen. One morning, the Egyptian elites woke up, still in the throes of their misery. They'd just been through several horrible things. Most significant, the sudden death of all the firstborn sons in the country, human and animal. If you think about it, they had to be devastated. And regardless of how you feel about Pharaoh and the Egyptians, it has to make you feel something, at least in the neighborhood of sympathy. The things God did to them to get them to release the Hebrews, wow. They had to be in some serious emotional distress. A lot of people died. A lot of Egyptians. Makes sense that they let the Hebrews go. But the Egyptians didn't release the slaves because of their grief. They let them go because they thought perhaps the Hebrews might be right. Maybe it was their God bringing all of this trauma and devastation to them, putting them through all that turmoil. They were superstitious people. They believed in unseen forces acting on the earth. They had a lot of gods, but this Hebrew God and the stuff he did, that had to scare them. They did not want to mess with people who had that kind of a God. So they let the Hebrews go. And so the children of Israel packed up their stuff, grabbed a bunch of stuff that technically belonged to the Egyptians, but were gained off the back of the slaves, grabbed everything they could carry and left. Took off not knowing where they were going. Took off following Moses to find and occupy the promised land. The Hebrews probably weren't gone long before the Egyptians woke up to a startling realization. Stuff wasn't getting done anymore. Nobody was cleaning. Nobody was cooking. Nobody was doing the work. The slaves used to do it, but now they were gone. Probably started grumbling. How are we going to keep this country running without our slaves? We built this place on slavery. Our entire economy is based on slavery. Now what are we going to do? So they decided to get them back. Forgot all about their fear of the Hebrew God. They needed things to go back to the way they were before. They needed to make Egypt great again. Back in the old days where the Hebrews were there taking care of everything and happy. They had to get them back. Pharaoh gathered most of his elite fighters to go after the escaping Hebrews. He probably could have taken just some basic troops, but he wanted revenge. they made him look bad, and they killed a lot of his people. Pharaoh's grief and fear turned into hatred. He would crush them. They would catch up with the runaways, bust a few heads, take out the leaders, kill a bunch of them, and everything would be back to normal. They would create as much terror as possible, and the Hebrews would willingly come running back. If he needed to, he could even hold a ballot and make them vote to go back to Egypt. That way it would look legit in the real world. He would make them pay. Moses had to know that Pharaoh would wake up and realize what he'd done. He was going to come after Moses and the Hebrews, and he was going to be brutal when he caught them. A whole lot of Hebrews were going to die, but Moses trusted in his God to lead him when they confronted Pharaoh. He trusted in his God when the plagues came. He trusted in his God because his God promised to deliver him. And every time he trusted in his God delivered. God promised, and Moses knew that God keeps God's promises. He knew Pharaoh was coming, but he pressed forward and trusted God. And to validate his trust, God directed their way. A pillar of cloud in the day and fire at night. God always in front, leading them. The story says that God helped Moses get a little tricky in their route. Moses led the people in a wandering path, made it seem like they were lost in the wilderness. But Moses, I think he knew what he was doing. He'd been a shepherd. He knew how to survive in the wilderness. He knew that they couldn't outrun Pharaoh, but maybe this little tactic would make him relax his guard a bit. Any little advantage they could get over the overwhelming forces. And they might have a better chance of retaining their freedom. As they walked, they came up against a natural obstacle, the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, depends on which translation you read. A good commander learns how to use the natural terrain to their advantage. This could work for them. See, Moses knew that all those Egyptian soldiers and horses and chariots were going to be heavy. They were fierce weapons of mass destruction in some situations, but none of those forces, none of those weapons did well in the mud. They were too heavy. If Moses could get them to chase the Hebrews through the mud, he could reduce the threat and give the Hebrews more time to get further away, maybe even pick off a few of the soldiers in the shadows and reduce their force. It could work. It still works. The Ukrainians used it a lot against the Russians. Problem was, the Hebrews weren't exactly light either. And first of all, there was a whole bunch of them. And they had a whole bunch of stuff to help them survive. All their stuff and all their stuff they took from the Egyptians. So mud wasn't a great thing for them either. So when the Hebrews looked up and saw the Egyptians on the horizon, they freaked. I'm not going to lie. I probably would have been cussing Moses too if I was there. We told you to leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. Yeah, it sucked being a slave, but it was better than being slaughtered out here in the wilderness. At least we would have got a grave. You got to admire Moses' courage under pressure. He's got the Egyptians on his heel ready to snap, and he's got his own people ready to hang him. Stand firm and don't be afraid, he said. You are about to see the power of our God. Won't be no more Egyptian army after this one. You just hold on a minute. Moses trusted his God to deliver them. God promised, and Moses trusted God to keep God's promises. And you know what? God did. God told Moses to stretch out his walking staff, and when he did it, the water separated, creating walls on each side. And then the wind came and dried up the mud, and the pillar of fire that had been guiding them through the night went behind them to slow down the army, give the Hebrews more time to get away. and get to the other side. The Egyptians saw that the Hebrews were almost in their grasp, and so with a renewed vigor, they charged, Pharaoh leading the way in his fierce and magnificent chariot, ready to spill some Hebrew blood. They charged the Hebrews, following them, charging through the parted waters and on the dry sea, ready to pounce. And, well, you know what happened. You saw the movie. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Martha, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned in the Red Sea. Or drowned it, as they said in my house. All God's little Hebrew children got away free. I remember preachers hitting this story so hard that by the time they got to this part, somebody would be running around the church and almost all of us would be slayed in the spirit. God rescued the Israelites from slavery and then certain death. And if God did it from them, God can do it for me. That should make even the frozen chosen want to leap for joy. This story has been used in so many ways to give hope to so many different peoples suffering oppression, and rightfully so. It gets to the core of the covenant God made with Abraham. And we know it's all about the covenant. Israel was in danger of virtual annihilation, but God delivered them. God delivered them from certain death. That's powerful. Now, I'll be the first to admit that there are all kinds of issues with this story. God's power is stronger and therefore better than imperial power, so trusting God, the Creator, instead of the things we create and treat like gods, an admittedly important lesson, and one that we should take to hope and heart. But a whole lot of people had to die to give this lesson. Worlds had to be irreparably changed so that we could get this lesson, that we should trust in God, that God would deliver us. I'm not going to lie. It troubles me. Even as it empowers me, it makes me weep. Anytime I see someone suffering, even my enemy, it makes me weep. And at the same time, I cannot deny how real it is. I'm a black man in America. I've only got to go back 3 or 4 generations to find family who were enslaved. I only got to go back a couple of generations to find family who was murdered for being uppity. I only got to go back a few generations to find family who was forced off their land, forced to forget their language and culture, thrown into poverty and ravaged by new diseases, and murdered as savages. And I know I'm not the only one. Ladies, how far back do you have to go to find your oppression? Tuesday? LGBTQ plus folks, non-binary folks, the poor, those suffering from addiction, the immigrant, the refugee. There's something about almost all of us that lets us identify with the children of Israel in this story. And this story does, in fact, give me hope, just as it did my ancestors who heard it while they themselves were in captivity. We hear this story, and we know that we can be free. And all the bad stuff in the story, all the killing, all the death, well, I hate to say it, but it's real. We kill a lot of people in our struggles for freedom. I'm not saying it's right. In fact, I don't think it is. But it's real. It doesn't have to be that way, though. That's why I need you to recognize that the tension and the struggle for freedom and the pain it usually causes is very real. People get hurt. People die. That part is real, and I need you to understand that. But if that part is real, wouldn't the rescue part also be real? Let me say that again. if the horrible parts are real, wouldn't the rescue part also be real? Family, it is real. God will rescue you. That's real. I know it is for me. I can't tell you how many times I felt like my back was against the wall and a violent death was figuratively or literally imminent. But by some miracle, I was rescued. By some miracle, I survived. By some miracle, the seas parted before me. The wind dried the mud, and I walked through to freedom. I bet if you think about it, you'll find those moments in your life too. Family, God will rescue. If you hold on and trust, you will get through. So as I close, there are a couple of things I want you to think about from this story that I haven't quite mentioned yet. First, God rescued the children of Israel from the Egyptians, but they were still in the wilderness. So their problems didn't end with their rescue from Pharaoh. You know the story, you saw the movie. But if you pay attention, you'll also notice that each time they ran into issues, every time for the rest of their existence to this day, God gets them out. Even the issues they caused themselves, God rescued them. Yes, family, God parts the seas and dries our muddy paths. But that doesn't mean we're out of the wilderness. So don't be surprised when new suffering comes. Just face it with confidence, knowing that God will once again bring you out. But that's not the main thing I think we need to hear in this message today. See, the Israelites were terrified, but their issue wasn't the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds they faced. It wasn't the long journey they faced to get to the Promised Land. It wasn't the uncertainty of their future. Yes, those things were concerned, but that's not what brought them so much terror to the point where they were ready to give up and give in. It wasn't what was ahead of them. It was what they left behind. They were out of Egypt and on their way forward, but that past issue, those past issues were hot on their tail, and it terrified them. But just when that past was ready to pounce and take them back, just when it was ready to strike them down, just when it was ready to drag them back into captivity, just when they thought all hope was lost and that their past was going to crush them once again, God put things back in order. God made a path for them to get through. Then God put things back in order and let nature itself destroy that past. Pharaoh and his army got drowned in the Red Sea. They were no longer a threat, and the children of Israel were free. Their past was destroyed and forgotten, and they were free. Some of us spend a lot of time running and hiding from stuff that's behind us. And on the surface, our fears are justified. Our past are filled with powerful forces that, if left unchecked, can destroy us. And now it seems we've angered them by seeking our freedom from them. We don't know if we can survive if they get their hands on us again. I know that place. I've been there many times. But family, I'm here to tell you that you don't have to worry about what's behind you anymore. See, God has sent the fiery pillar to mask your escape and slow down the pursuit. And God has already sent someone to stretch out their staff. God has already started parting the seas and drying the mud so that you can safely cross. And God will set things right and destroy the power that your past has over you. You are on the other side now. You are on dry land now. You have escaped from the threat of your past. Neither Pharaoh nor his army have any power over you anymore. You are free. Yes, you will still have troubles. Yes, you will still need a rescue now and then. But now you can go forward on your journey with assurance that your rescue is coming. It'll be there when you need it. You are free from your past, family. You have crossed to the other side. You have been forgiven and you are loved. Do you believe that? Yes. Do you believe that? Then come on. Let's go find the promised land. Amen.